Thank you. Well, it was a pleasure to get no boos when it was announced that I'm an attorney. I know that we are we are not so appreciated in our society, but I believe, like so many have said, 98% of the attorneys give 2% of the good ones a bad name, and I like to think that I fit within the good ones. But I will say this, I did retire. I'm no longer practicing law day to day. I retired about a year ago to focus on this mission. And to focus on constitutional restoration. I believe we've got to do something different. We've got to stop paying lip service to giving our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And it's got to mean something different than the sound bites and the punchline that we've been using it as over the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of people step up. You're here because you're one of the individuals that have stepped up. There's a lot of people out there that see that there's a problem, but don't feel that they can have an impact. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. I want to talk about several things. We'll see how far we get. I would like to talk about the underlying philosophy that we're dealing with that is destroying our Constitution. And I would like, hopefully at some point, to talk about what the Republican Party must do differently to message, to communicate this thing in order to rally those people out there that are not politically active, and even those who are politically active but are kind of riding the fence. Because I think there's a lot of things we can be doing differently to really attract the masses. And it has to do with taking really a page out of the rule book of the Democrats, something that they do very, very well, and it's the marketing of the message. We'll see how far we get. But we started out talking about President Obama. It was he that said just a month ago, if Congress won't work with me, I've got a pen and a phone. During the State of the Union address, if Congress won't work with me, I will move unilaterally. The problem with that, as I watched this, it was so disturbing to watch. Well over 100 individuals stand and give him an ovation. Yes. Gave him an ovation. What was so disturbing about this is the dynamic that existed at that moment in time. Individuals from the legislature standing up and applauding someone who has just told them, I will steal your power away from you, and bypass what it is that the Constitution says I must comply with in order to accomplish an agenda. And it was just a few days later where a few Democrats set up an entity in order to do what? In order to facilitate executive orders. The very legislature that is supposed to be protecting the people and ensuring that there is a process that we go through in order to enact certain laws, that is a refining process that's supposed to take place, is not going to take place. One man gets to decide it. Here's the problem. If you were to talk about progressives and liberals, we use those terms all the time, but we don't define what those terms actually mean. It's progressives and liberals that have bought into the idea that you find in Plato's Republic, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. They believe that men with power are benevolent. They believe that the mainstream, the peons, we're the peons, the ones being governed, that we are inclined towards greed, we're inclined towards power, we're inclined to hurt one another. Therefore, the philosopher kings must rise up and dictate how the peons will behave. Oddly enough, the inclination towards power and greed and harming one another doesn't apply with those that lead. That's the odd thing about it. That's why this Leviathan and Plato's Republic makes no sense. But it is the philosophy of the liberals and the progressives. Do you remember it was President Obama not too long ago? He says, you may hear the voices calling out to you and warning you about government and tyranny encroaching at every turn. I urge you to ignore those voices. Those were his words, not mine. Where does that come from? It comes from a deep-seated liberal philosophy. And I have to say one thing that I kind of, there's a certain element that makes me kind of proud. I came from a home where my father was a liberal progressive. My mother, on the other hand, was very conservative, as conservative as they come. And we would sit around the dinner table, from the time that I can remember, and have these discussions about philosophy, liberal philosophy. What does it mean when you say you're a progressive versus that of a conservative? And here's the bottom line. We can go back and we can identify an individual like Woodrow Wilson. And we often say, yeah, that guy he is the problem. Well, let's look at what he said. Because what he said is being played out in 2014. Here's what the man said. If you want to understand the Declaration of Independence, don't read the preface. Think about that for a moment. If you want to understand the Declaration of Independence, don't read the preface. His words. If you remove the preface, which is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, what are you left with? You're left with 27 grievances. And Woodrow Wilson goes on to say that we are just as free as the founders. They had problems, we have problems. They were free to deal with their problems, we are free to deal with our problems. And he said this, we are not bound by the words of the founders. We are just as free as they were. He then went on to say this is progressive philosophy, defining our terms. He went on to say that you may say men and women are born free, but deep down in your hearts you know they are not. It was FDR that says necessitous men are not born free. It's President Barack Obama who says, you didn't build that. See, look at this philosophy being played out. We believe, as freedom-loving individuals who revere the founders, we believe that men and women are born free. They do not. They believe that it is only government that can liberate the individual. It is only the government that can liberate the individual. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the statements being made by people like Senator Tom Harkin of Iowa. He is the one who stood up on national TV and said, we've finally given the people the unalienable right to health care. You know those crazy founders? Those crazy founders, you know, the red-haired wonder, 33 years old, Thomas Jefferson, he just got a little bit of a mix-up going on here. It was endowed by our government with those unalienable rights. Endowed by our Creator. And you can look at individuals like Jim Clyburn. Jim Clyburn, the third highest ranking Democrat, who looks at our Constitution and says it's an outdated document because men are now benevolent. We can trust them. We don't need a ruling document. We don't need the ruling document. And so when you ask him, where do you get your authority to act? And he said on national TV with Andrew Napolitano, well, you're asking me about a particular piece of legislation, health care. Tell me where in the Constitution it says I can't do what you're saying that I can't. This is a person who's turned the Constitution on its head. The document, the Constitution, is one that tells government what they can do. And if it doesn't give them the power to do those things, you can't do it. You can look at individuals like Phil Hare. Phil Hare, individual from Illinois, he's no longer in Congress. But when he was asked about health care, he says, you know what? I don't really care about the Constitution when it comes to this issue. Those are his words. I care more about the people that are dying and that can't pay their bills. That's what I care about. It says the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Well, that was the Declaration of Independence, not the Constitution, number one. But again, it's this idea that only government can liberate the individual. And what we say is, no, we are inherently free, and with freedom comes risk. It comes the risk to fail. And so let me just give you an example that I think really summarizes this up, and I'm going to turn it over to Trevor. And it's this. This is the easiest way, I believe, to conceptualize conservative, liberal, loving, or liberty-minded philosophy versus liberal, progressive philosophy. Every one of you is going to make a decision when you leave here today. You're going to go to your car and you're going to leave. You're going to make decisions as to whether you're going to turn right or left. When I leave here, I'm going to make a right, and another right. It's going to be 3 rights to the freeway. Okay? Here we go. And if we were to have a conversation with a liberal progressive, they would say, okay, well, why did you make those decisions? I would say, because I'm inherently free to make those decisions. I made the decision to do that. And we would agree with that. But what the liberal progressive philosophy would say is this. You made those decisions because you're enslaved. Metaphorically, you are enslaved. You have an addiction. You don't have food on the table. You don't have health care. You don't have adequate housing. You are enslaved. And only government can liberate you. Only we can make sure that you live free and have enough food on the table. Only we, the government, can liberate you and make sure that you have adequate health care. Only we can make sure that you have adequate housing. See, this is the philosophy that we're dealing with. And I think when we go out and we fight this battle together, we have to understand what it is that we're actually fighting. Sometimes I feel like we're fighting way up here with these peripheral issues that we're all concerned about. But I think until we define our terms and bring them back to a foundational argument, it can be very difficult. This message is incredibly, incredibly easy to sell. I've had the privilege to be out on the college campuses for the last 10 years, going into Lion's Den and actually teaching classes with these kids that have some pretty warped ideas about the way the world operates. And when I bring them into class on the first day, I typically ask them some of the same questions. Where do our liberties come from? Well over 80% of my students say they come from government. Where did that come from? These are kids that are 18 to 85 years old that have been coming through my class for the last decade, telling me on the first day of class, it's government that liberates us. Or when you ask them what's more important, public safety or individual liberty, well over 80%, in fact it's closer to 90 to 95% will say this: public safety should carry the day. Individual liberty should take a back seat. So I'm asking them these questions, and they have these warped ideas. But over the next 16 weeks, I have a chance to present both sides. Let them articulate what it is that they believe, create relationships with them, and show them what the other side looks like. And guess what happens? You see a transformation. So I have kids, this happened 2 semesters ago. I had kids coming through my class. Over 90% of them were Obama supporters. By the end of the 6 weeks, well over 75% were attending Ron Paul rallies. That's just the way it is. Because it's an incredibly easy message to sell. Let me just give you the 3 sound bites that I roll with as a starting point for my students. And I think that it's a starting point for all of us to start with. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Bill Whittle talks a little bit about this in selling the message. I've been doing it for 10 years, so I kind of think Bill took this from me. But of course, the idea is true. The idea is true, and I'll ask my students, who here wants to be told what to do? I haven't had one student in 10 years stand up and say, I want to be told what to do. So which message is the easier sell? Which party is telling you what to do more than the other? It's the Democrat Party. It's not the Republican Party. Next, who believes government should have to follow the rules? I've never had one student stand up and say, I don't believe government should have to follow the rules. Not one time. Not one time. The question is, what is the rule book? What rules should they have to play by? Now it's an opportunity to talk about a rule book that is supposed to be static, immovable, and we know what that rule book is. It's the Constitution. Now we're having that conversation because we've established common ground. And the third question I enjoy asking students is, do you want to keep the fruits of your labor? All of them want to keep the fruits of their labor. All of them do. All of them do. The destruction of our Constitution really comes down to messaging. Because these people, America is being lied to by individuals that are advocating something that is antithetical to freedom. It's antithetical to everything that the human experiences in his heart. That is, I want to be left alone. Leave me alone. Let me be free. But when government begins to offer them something at taxpayers' expense, human nature is inclined to jump on board. Let's go out and present to them the alternatives. I've taken more than my time, but I hope to have another opportunity with that. Thank you so much.
Let me introduce